Okay, so this is part one of our of the moon, because the moon is really so important. This really is kind of what started this entire series, was a question that I actually had about the moon, which was how I was reading all this stuff. I was reading all this Bonatti. Excuse me. I was reading all of this Bonatti, and I was reading all of this, Al-Kabisi, all of this medieval Islamic period, so 7th to 14th century, let's say. And in every case, it was always talking about whatever is happening to the moon, or whatever you're trying to fortify, or if the moon is fortified or not fortified, that has an important effect on the entire chart. And that it would have the same kind of negative effect. The moon being in a bad condition, for instance, would have the same kind of negative effect in a natal chart as it would in a horary chart. Now, that's an important thing to think about. And of course, I'll probably be saying all of this next week too, but that's an important thing to think about, or an electional chart, because that means then that the moon can make or break a horary chart, right? If we're trying to figure out if something is going to happen, and generally we're looking at the moon as what's going to happen, as the thing that perfects or makes the thing come to be. So if I'm asking about being pregnant, I'm looking for the moon to be the significator. Remember, the moon is always the co-significator of every matter. So let's first get that out of the way. So this was one of the first things that made me think about this. The moon is the co-significator of every matter. I saw it all the time in every source that I read. And of course, as a horary person, the moon is always the co-significator for the question, right? So you've got the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant, which represent the person asking the question, but then the moon is almost always a significator for the question itself, and also a co-significator for the person as well. So the moon is always the co-significator in all matters. So that's an important thing to be thinking about. She's the co-significator. She is always, always involved in everything. And so this is what made me wonder, because we do look at horary charts differently. I certainly did and do. We do look at how the moon functions in a horary chart as basically the roll of the dice and fortuna, differently than in a natal chart. But we were just talking about this, and maybe Shanice was even there on Thursday. We were just talking about this very thing, and about how, considering that the moon represents the mind, and of course it represents the emotion, and it represents the non-rational mind. So there's kind of the mental emotional aspect that's connected to the moon right there. That, in a lot of ways, as we were saying, let's say you are a Mars-Moon opposition person. You could be argumentative and difficult to deal with, and be harsh in demeanor and rub people the wrong way, and thus not be able to kind of make the things that you want. We were just talking about the 11th house last week, right? So you might not be able to make that 11th house dream come true because your moon, Mars, might be getting in the way because of your kind of natural inclination towards being aggressive and assertive and combative. Right? Your moon Saturn conjunction could make you depressive and make you paralyzed and unable to do anything, and completely pessimistic, and just kind of pessimistic, and everything is a labor, and it's difficult to get out of bed even, and the glass is always half empty, and that can also get in the way of how we're able to do things. So there's many different ways in which the moon can be impeded, and we'll look at that next week. This week, we're just going to look at the actual significations of the moon, but some of those things that we're talking about will be kind of implied in what we see. So as usual, we start with Vettius Valens in the 2nd century, and look at how kind of comprehensive this idea of the moon is. Lit by the reflection of the sun's light, possessing a borrowed light in a nativity indicates man's life, right? So vitae is one of the terms for the ascendant. Body, corpus is one of the terms for the ascendant. Vitae, corpus, inganium, right? So vitae is body, vitae is life, corpus is body, right? So the very first two things are the same two things that we tend to see for the ascendant. The mother, which makes sense. Conception, which I think is interesting, and I think this might be the only place where we see that. Beauty / appearance, and that's interesting because my own kind of conception and carriage to term is extremely fraught with all kinds of interesting stuff, and my moon is in Aries. And I, in the womb went through experiences where my grandmother tried to abort me, and I was basically born out of wedlock, and it created this huge problem. And she went through all of these methods of how to try to get rid of me and kill me in the first few weeks of her carrying me. So that might be, it might be interesting to look at, because certainly, I'm just looking at the moon from the sign of Aries, and of course Mars is, not the most welcoming of signs, right? And so I was definitely not welcome. Anyway, so it might be interesting to look at your own moons in that way. I just thought that was interesting when I saw it. Beauty / appearance. Okay, the ascendant again. Sight. Okay, now we come to this issue around the lights, or this area around the lights. So the sun and the moon, one of the first things I remember noticing when I moved away from home was that wherever I walked, I don't think I never really paid any attention, but once I was alone, I got this real feeling of that wherever you went, the sun was always following you and the moon was always following you. Like, I'd be walking and there was the sun. Everywhere I went, the sun was there, and everywhere I went at night, the moon was there. I'd be out late at night, and the moon was still there. When she was visible, and it became kind of like this mother-father thing. This kind of, it's like, they're always there, kind of with me, which is cool. But they're also known as the two lights in the sky. A little while ago on Clubhouse, I was talking about this thing called Akshaya Tritiya. Oh, no problem. Thanks, Maria. Oops. I was talking about Akshaya Tritiya and how Akshaya Tritiya, there we go. I was talking about Akshaya Tritiya. Akshaya means eye, and Tritiya means is the term that's used for the third lunar day of any lunar cycle, the 14-day, 15-day cycle. And so that is really an important day, because it's when sidereally the sun is in Aries and the moon is in Taurus. And so it's a day when that actually kind of ends up happening, and it almost always ends up happening on the third day of the lunar day of the lunar cycle. And so Akshaya Tritiya is the name of that. And so that really kind of highlights this concept of the sun and the moon as the two eyes in the sky. And of course, the sun is the eye in the sky, that sees the all-seeing eye. Anyway, but the sun is the right eye in men and left eye in women, and vice versa. The moon is the right eye in women and the left eye in men. Okay, so let's see. Living together, legitimate marriage. This is because the moon by Chaldean order, and we talk about the Chaldean order all the time. The moon is the significator for the 7th house, and she is the significator for women. And remember also that in Valence's time, 99% of the people having their astrology charts read, if they indeed had a natal chart, were men. And so the 7th house would be representing women and the wife. Nurture. So nurture, of course, now here we get into the more conventional lunar aspects. Nurture. But now we come to the older brother. What the hell is that about? Well, the moon is in the house of her joy, in the 3rd house, which is the house of siblings. So it could have something to do with that. Housekeeping, that comes back to what we think about with mother and nurture, and mother and the moon and nurture. The queen, that makes perfect sense, because the sun is the royal male. The mistress of the house, right? So if the sun is the king, the moon is the queen. Possessions and fortune. Now here we come with what we were just talking about, with how the moon is seen in things like horary charts and electional charts, where she's indicating the quotient of fortune that's possible, and how well something can actually happen, how well she can transmit the celestial influences to the experience that we're talking about, so that it can perfect. The city. Now, I wonder, that's interesting. But if by mundane astrology we know that the moon represents the common people, and common people often live in the city, the assembly of the people. See, that's right after it. Gains, coming back to possessions and fortune, expenses, the households of the house, voyages, travels, and wandering. Now, that makes a lot of sense. And this is connected to the concept of the moon as something changeable, and also representing different situations, or different situations or different conditions, differing conditions. And so travel has a tendency to do that. And remember, once again, the third house is the house of short travel, of long distance travel, or travel by road. And remember, when we were looking at the third house, we saw that video of Ella Fitzgerald with Chick Webb and all that road travel that they did. And they went all over in a very short amount of time. And so that's kind of an aspect of the moon too. So even though Mercury is kind of known to be the ruler of travel and roads, the moon also is known for travel, because the moon and Mercury are both the fastest two planets. They're both convertible and changeable. And so that changeability of the moon is where we go. So when we go from one place to the other, we change. And so the moon represents that changeability. We come to the temperament of the moon, which is cold and wet. Jala Tattva, which is water element, and phlegmatic temperament. And so the moon represents and controls the waters, and represents all bodies of water, including the human body, right? And so we just saw all of the connections with the body, with valence. And then domicile, detriment, Cancer, Capricorn, exaltation, and fall, Taurus, and Scorpio. So one of the things that I've been talking about on Clubhouse with, I work with this woman that I've known for years, and we both did tarot and numerology together many years ago, and she's now kind of in charge of the group that we were involved with. We were talking about the second chakra, first of all. So knowing that, if you've seen my video on planetary magic, I do spend a lot of time talking about the connection between the elements, the planets, and the chakras. And so the element that represents the water element, or the chakra that represents the water element, is the second chakra. And the two water planets are the moon and Venus. And so in both cases, we talked quite a bit about this concept of magnetism, right? Because the moon has a magnetic pull over the waters, right? She has a magnetic pull over the tides. High tide is definitely connected to the moon's phases, right? And different, the differing tides. And I used to live by the ocean. I remember how every day it was a completely different thing, just like the moon. Every day it's a completely different thing. She's in a completely different relationship to the sun. She's in a completely different relationship to your vision, etc. Right? So there's this changeability that we're talking about, but also this aspect of magnetism. And so maybe that's part of what we're getting at when we're talking about whether or not the moon can power an entire chart. What's the quotient of magnetism? What's the quantity of magnetism, of magnetism to bring in, to perfect, the magnetism to bring in, to perfect. Yeah, that's kind of, I think, what I'm looking at. Anyway, okay, so the moon, this is coming from Abu Mashar, although you can see Kabizi's on the other side over here. So benevolent, cold and moist, as we just said, phlegmatic and moderate, a little bit hot for the reason that her light is from the sun, okay? Because remember, the moon's main function is to reflect. Write that down. The moon's main function is to reflect, because we're going to see that come up. A little bit hot for the reason, blah, blah, blah. Powerful over joy, clean, skilled in the inceptions of all duties, regal, increasing life, a dancer at the head of a procession. That's interesting. A protectress over countrysides and waters and their courses. We'll be seeing more of that kind of stuff. Countrysides, waters, and their courses. Marrying, right? Because Venus, because not Venus, but moon is women. Over sisters, right? Because the moon is also female, and Venus would be female siblings. Creating embryos, right? So that's the conception. Watching over mothers and likewise their sisters and the sisters of fathers, okay? So all female relatives. And legates, once again, relatives are third house, so back to the moon. And legates and legations and false words. I think that's really interesting, this idea of legates and legations, because I've usually seen legates and legations in connection with the fifth house, which of course is the joy of Venus, and never seen this before with legates. So a legate is kind of like an ambassador or someone who's a representative of a larger body, and legation. So exactly, but legal, the term legal comes from that as well. Litigation probably has some of this as well in it. But so it's some kind of formal, it's usually formal petitioning, and formal communications between others. So, so that might have something to do with it, this formal communication between luminaries, right? So the king doesn't go and talk to his henchmen, he sends somebody to talk to them for them. Now that's Mercury, right? The messenger. But maybe or to his wife even, he might send his if he has a really important thing he needs to talk to her about, he might actually not go to her room, he might send somebody to her. I mean, I'm spitballing here, so I might be full of shit. All right, so anyway, legations and false words, which is interesting. So that's once again connecting it to Mercury and the prosperities of fortune, right? That's an aspect of the moon that's lost because lost in natal, and then lost especially in modern astrology. So she's the luminary of the night, light, fit in every matter, desires joy and beauty and being praised. So there's some aspect of the moon with happiness and joy, right? So powerful over joy. She desires joy and beauty and being praised. So one of the things that I've been noticing is that there tend to be seeds of other benefics. There's only so much benefic stuff going on, right? There's only so many benefic types of situations or malefic types of situations, although it seems like there can be so many. But there's only so many ways to enjoy something or to like something. You can take joy in it, you can take pleasure in it, you can admire the beauty in it, you can admire the sensual pleasure of it, right? You can admire the technicality of it, the complexity, so admiration, joy in things of that nature. So the moon, Venus, Jupiter, all of those planets, even though they have their own particular kingdoms, they all have governance over joy and enjoyment, over pleasure and enjoyment and beauty, right? And we take pleasure in beauty, right? So even though Venus represents pleasure and beauty, the moon has a bit of it in her, Jupiter has a bit of it in him. And she signifies the beginning of every work, right? Because that's the moon in electional astrology. And the knowledge of riches and nobles, because that's the moon in natal astrology. And fortune in the means of livelihood and the attaining of those things which she wanted, once again, or that could also be in horary or natal, both of those. And poverty in religion and the higher sciences. Isn't that also interesting? Also miracles and sorcery and a multitude of thoughts and matters. Now, this is because, of course, the moon is the significatrix, she's the transmitter between the celestial realm, which means that all sorcery and miracles have this hermetic principle of as above, so below there as part of it. So you're always, if you're doing magic, you're almost always working with the moon, right? If you're creating a talisman to make something better, you almost, a planetary talisman to help your Venus so you can find a soulmate, then almost always you want the moon to be applying to Venus in that talisman, right? So you always are fixing the moon at the beginning of something, at the beginning of any work, including a magical or occult one. Also, the inexperience of the mind in engineering and the science of lands. Isn't that interesting? We tend to think of the Mercury-Saturn as the engineering thing, but here the Mercury is involved. So we might want to be looking at the moon as well, involved with Mercury and Saturn. Because of course the moon and the Mercury in this period are perceived as the two different aspects of mind, right? So one aspect of the moon is the non-rational, which houses the senses and the sensitive soul, as it was called. And then Mercury was the intellect, the intellective soul, the rational mind. And accounting and surveying, now that's Mercury, right? And weakness of one's sense. So now, once again, there's this kind of conflation of Mercury and the moon. We saw it a little bit in something else a little bit earlier too. So the moon takes on some of Mercury's qualities because remember, they're the two fastest planets. They're the two most neutral, and they're the two ones that take on convertible planets. So they're the two planets that take on the aspects, or the what's the word I'm looking for? Take on the characteristics of any planet that they're with. So very important, interesting thing how they're doing that, how they're kind of bringing those two together. And she signifies women. Oh, and look, and weakness of one's sense. Right, so we're just talking about the sensitive soul, and how the moon is the sensitive soul in astrology, and that weakness of sense. And so the moon houses the soul, the senses, and she signifies women who have nobility and marriage unions. Women who have nobility, right, would be queen. Marriage unions, Venus. I mean, moon is the ruler of women, and is the significator for the seventh house, even though Venus is the significator for marriage. But once again, the moon carries just a little bit of that Venus stuff in her. So she's about women. Women are about generally off. I mean, we'll think about, I won't say are about, but women have been conditioned to be about marriage. And every pregnant woman, right, there's the fertility and the conception aspect, even though Venus and Jupiter are really more specifically fertility. Notice we haven't seen a real, what's the word I'm looking for, a real emphasis on fertility. Right, which you would think would be the case when you're dealing with the moon. But remember, the moon is pure and chaste. In Greek mythology, she's a huntress. She doesn't want to have anything to do with men. Right? She doesn't have anything. She's a huntress. What was she did? I forget what she did to the guy who a guy like tried to get into her like female circle, and she turned him into stone or something like that. But Diana's like a lesbian, like a lesbian virgin. So the moon is not necessarily specific to fertility, even though it is specific to conception. Isn't that interesting? Right? Because conception is different from fertility. Conception is the inception of something, the very beginning, when the things come, right? It's like when the sun and the moon come together, that's conception, right? But that's not fertility. It's what happens on the road to the full moon that expresses the fertility of the moon. And then at the full moon, right? That's her fertile period, or that's her fertile state, right? And I don't even think the full moon itself was the fertile state. The waning phase, the entire waning phase of the moon is her fertile state. Anyway, let's see. Also, mothers and maternal aunts, which makes sense. Midwives and older sisters. So she's pretty much all platonic females in your life. Make sense? That makes sense, right? And Venus is all the women you would fuck, or desire, right? Because Venus is desire. And messengers and the postal service, and reports, fugitives, and lying and accusations. And messengers and the postal service, and that sounds like Mercury. And reports, fugitives, and lying and accusations. That sounds a little bit like Saturn. Remember, we were just looking at Saturn, and we were talking about, the false tongue of Saturn and the lying and accusations. Right? So she's got, so remember when we were looking at the sun, one of the things, we were looking at the sun, and the sun had all of the significations of all of the planets in him. He had all of them. And because, of course, the sun is the source of life. So he's the source of all of the significations of the planets. But we're seeing something a little bit similar here. The moon also seems to have the significations in them. Why? Because it's her role to reflect the light of anything. It's her role to absorb and reflect and transmit. Absorb, reflect, transmit. And so that means she can become anything. She can and will become anything with anyone. And we're going to be looking at charts. The charts that we're going to look at are from that particular angle. This angle of what does the moon become? Who turns her into whatever she becomes, and what does she become, and who turns her into it? So also she's a master with masters and slave with slaves. See, that's showing it's the same kind of thing. And with every man, she is just like his nature. Once again, there's this reflective nature, a multitude of forgetting, timid, a flawless heart, cheerful to people, revered by them, flattered by them. So this timidity, this is something I saw quite a bit. And so once again, if you are reflective, if you're receptive, reflective, then you might not be very assertive. So there's a timid aspect of timidity to the moon, considering especially that it's hard for her to be something without someone else, right? So there's more of the conditioning of women in culture, that you're nothing without someone, you're not anyone on your own, right? So this part of that is connected with this idea of the moon as women, right? And the moon has no light of her own. She only reflects the light of the sun, right? She has no light of her own. It's like the rib of Adam. So it's a similar kind of, it's an unfortunate and similar kind of paternalistic concept of femininity. And it's interesting that in Hindu astrology, there's less of this idea, well, there's certainly the reflective and all that, but also there's a male deity that's connected with the moon called Soma. And so there's this androgynous aspect to the moon where Soma is also the moon. And almost all of the planets have deities that are male, that are including Venus. Surya is the male Venus. There's Venus, the planet, but then there's Surya, the actual Graha or Deva that you would pray to, and that's male. And same thing with Soma, you would pray to Soma, who's male, or Chandra. Let's see, she does not, let's see, a multitude forgetting, a flawless heart, cheerful to people. So this cheer and joy thing, revered by them, flattered. She does not hide her secrets, and she signifies a multitude of infirmities and caring for the fitness of bodies and the cutting of hair, also a bounty of foods and a scarcity of sexual intercourse. Remember I said she's a lesbian virgin. And so the cutting of hair, or she might be an asexual virgin. She might not even be lesbian. She might be an asexual virgin, but she's pure and chaste. There's a great line in Oscar Wilde's Salome, where Salome says, "Oh, she is pure and chaste, the moon. She does not give herself to men like the other goddesses." So let's see, mothers, so Kabizi, mothers. So we're going to see this next when we get to Bonatti. Mothers, this is important. Okay, so when we get to Bonatti, he's going to kind of talk a little bit more about this. He's going to expound on this point. And she is the significatrix of mothers if someone's nativity were nocturnal. So the concept for the general significators for mother are Venus by day and moon by night. Right, so in a nocturnal chart, then you would use the moon as the primary significator of the mother. In the daytime chart, you would use Venus as the primary significator. And remember last week, we were talking about how we stack significations, our checklist of significations, in order to make a judgment, right? So we start with the house, then the ruler of the house, then the planets in the house, then what do we say? Then the parts belonging to the house are connected to the house. Then we would also look at the mutants of the house, especially the compound mutant of the house, the triplicity rulers of the house, and then we also would look at the natural significators for the house, so natural significations for the house. Now you can do that generally too. Like let's say you're looking at, someone's chart, nighttime chart, and you just want to kind of get a read for mother generally. Now, this is what they do generally in modern astrology, but we know that we would want to be looking at Venus in the daytime, right? You can do that, but I would never just go by that, right? I would never just go. Someone asked about deciding factors last week, and I try not to use a deciding factor consistently. You know, often there will be something that is a deciding factor, but I try to take in as global a consideration as possible. And so what I would think to do instead is to, like, for instance, you could just do a quick check. Oh, what's the state? Like, for instance, in a guy who's having problems meeting women in his chart, right? He's got a female problem. So I would look at Venus and the moon just by themselves as significators for women. Right, and then of course, then I could look at Venus as the significator for sex and love, and affection. And remember, she's a natural significator for the 5th house and the 11th. Remember? So anything, and then of course she's the lady of marriage. So there we've got all these concepts, these issues around, in interpersonal relationships and everything is also very Venusian. So you could get a quick kind of look at that based on the what's the word I use all the time, local determination of those 2 planets. And just like I said, you've got an incel, be interesting to look at charts of 10 incels and look at the Venus and Moon in the chart, right? Because then we should be able to see that there are problems. All right, okay, so we're going to see this when we get to profession. So I'm going to move on. Bundy, temperate phlegm. She signifies the childish age and the beginning of growth. Now, there's this thing called the Ptolemaic Ages of Man, right? And so they're specific to, I guess Ptolemy created this system, and the Ptolemaic Ages of Man gives the moon the first, so it goes up the Chaldaic order from fastest to slowest. It gives the moon the first 4 years. It gives Mercury from 4 to 14. It gives Venus from 14 to 22. It gives the Sun from 22 to 41. It gives Mars from 41 to 56. It gives Jupiter from 56 to 68. And then it gives Saturn from 68 to the end of life. Okay, so those are the Ptolemaic Ages of Man, and they do work. I've looked back on my own life, and I've also worked on them with other charts. When I do my solar return readings, this is one of the first things that I talk about with them is what Ptolemaic age you're in. So kind of take note of your age. Hopefully you wrote down what I just said and the Ptolemaic ages, although that stuff is that's in the traditional astrology course too. It's in the it's in the perfections, annual perfections and the solar return class. Okay, so that's in the traditional astrology course, annual perfections and solar returns. I talk about this in depth. Okay, so let's see. She represents the childish age and the beginning of growth. Namely the first 4 years from the nativity, bam, on account of her repeated and quick changes in the manner of the changes in the time of the childhood. And the same philosopher, so he's talking about developmental changes. And the same philosopher said that of work, she has legations and commissions, right? We're going to come back to that when we get to profession. She signifies the chief place, for she knows how to represent the matters of kings and princes and magnates, who are, if the native were in charge of them and the like. So we're back kind of in the profession-oriented stuff too, but we'll see more of this. Fortune in the cultivation, if she were to have dignity in the 4th house of the earth at the hour of the nativity, so basically in a nativity. And of faith, she signifies religion, wherefore lunar men often become religious, and especially in youth. But sometimes they do not well observe their promises to God, and they rarely persevere well in religions, and from thence arise the tales of the common people. I have a good friend who's Cancer, or he was a good friend, he's now an enemy, but who Cancer rising, and very much this is the case with this person. Okay, so remember we were talking about Bundy and the moon and mothers. And so now what Bundy is doing here is what he would basically do with the ruler of the 10th, which represents mother, right? And also, I guess there aren't any triplicity rulers that represent mother, but also the planet that rules the part of mothers, right? So all of this is the same thing that he would say in any case with anything, right? But so the moon is benefic, feminine, nocturnal. She works coldness and moisture. We know all this through her nature, and she is significatrix of mothers. Bam, makes perfect sense. Once at the nativity we're nocturnal, she signifies what will happen to the native from the mother. Okay, so he's actually making a pretty, he's throwing a gauntlet down of sorts, right? He's saying, okay, if it's a nocturnal nativity, you can look directly at what's going on with the mother, with the person and the mother based on the chart. Now, note what he says has to happen for you to be able to do it, though. You have to consider how the moon behaves with the significator of the native. Now, the significator of the native is the ruler of the ascendant, or the mutant of the ascendant. Because if she were to aspect him with a good aspect, trine or sextile, if she were to receive him with perfect reception, right, we've just talked about that, it will be well for the native from the mother. So the way to be able to do this is only if the moon is aspecting the ruler of the ascendant. Now, I'll be honest with you. Now, of course, remember when they say aspect, they always mean what? They always mean applying, right? Right, if it's only an aspect if it's an applying aspect. It does not, the concept of the term that they would use, the Latin term is conjungi or conjungio, and specifically conjungio is an applying aspect. So a joining. So if it, so that more than likely it would say something, but if she were to join to him or aspect to him, it means conjoining. It means applying aspect. So there needs to be an applying aspect between the moon and the ruler of the ascendant for you to be able to make this judgment. Okay, or she would receive him with perfect reception, it will be well for the native from the mother. If, however, she were to aspect him with a bad aspect, right, it will be ill for him from the mother, and understand the same about the mother from the child, because if the significator of the native were to receive the moon, it will be well for the mother from the native. If, however, it were to aspect her badly without reception, it will be ill for the mother from the native. Okay, so in this particular case, now I've got a separating aspect between my ruler of the ascendant and the moon. Now this specifically says to look for an applying aspect. I mean, by implication. And the reason I think that maybe it doesn't work, or it might work only if I look at the receptions, etc. Hold on a second. How does that work if the moon is the ruler of the ascendant? It doesn't. It doesn't. That basically then you don't have that. Then you can't use it. That's a great fucking question. No, you can't use it, right? I mean, you can possibly use it. So this is the thing. We need, what's the word I'm looking for? We need important, or we need good significators. We need consistent, that's the word I was looking for, consistent significators. If the moon is the ruler of the ascendant, the moon now becomes you. The moon now becomes you. It was already co-representing you, and also representing the mother, and also representing blah, blah, blah. But I would say if you've got Cancer rising, which is basically what you're asking me, what if the moon is the ruler of the ascendant? If you've got Cancer rising, then you need to use the 10th house ruler and the ruler of the part of the moon, of the part of the mother, rather, as the planet that rules that part, as your significators for mother. And specifically, and most specifically, I would look for planet of the mother, because the 10th house is carrying so much other weight, right? It's carrying career weight, it's carrying reputation weight, it's carrying what's going on in the person's life weight, right? It's showing up in lots of different ways, and it may or may not specifically show up as the mother it should, if it's planet in the 10th, and same thing with the planet that rules the 10th. Right, so the planet that represents the lot of mother, I think, is maybe one of the most consistent and steadiest in this particular case, because just because the 10th house is carrying so much other duty. What you ought to consider how the moon behaves, we've already talked about that. Okay, so we move away from that, and now we move into the type of person, or the type of manner, right? Like, so the Venusian manner is flirtatious and sweet speaking, and mirthful and funny, and the Saturnian manner is pessimistic and dull and boring, or painstaking. So of the quality of mind according to her complexion with the planets. That's what we're going to look at in the charts today. So basically what they're saying is she doesn't really have her, although there is a little bit here, which if a fortune complected with her and that fortune with Venus, it doesn't even bother. It doesn't even bother. It immediately says, hey, she's gonna be like whoever she's with. Which begs the question, what if she's not aspecting anybody? What if you're one of those very few people who have a feral moon who is making no aspects in the sign that she's in. Right? Because the whole thing about astrology is that the moon is going to do, the whole thing about astrology is that what tells you what has happened, what is going to happen, what has happened, what is happening, and what is going to happen, and how, is what connections the moon makes when she enters a sign. Let's say the moon enters the sign of Leo, and Saturn is in Aquarius, and Mars is in Scorpio, and the Sun and Mars are in Scorpio, and Saturn is in Aquarius, and Venus is in Venus is in Virgo. What was it, Leo? No, Venus is in Cancer. Right? You've got all of that stuff going. Is it a void of course moon in that case? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. No, I'm saying she's just starting. Oh, you mean, oh, you're saying if she makes no aspects at all, is it a void of course moon? Very good question. So that's a great question. And is that what you meant? Yeah, thank you. So there is a difference from a moon that is feral or wild and a moon that is void of course. A moon that is void of course has finished all of her applications in the sign she's in, right? So let's say the moon is at 1 degree of Leo and that Saturn is at 25 degrees of Aquarius. The Sun and Mars are at 18. The Venus is at 16, right? And then the Mercury and everything else is between 16 and 25, wherever they are. So for that period between 0 and 16, the moon is in a feral period. She's not going to make any aspects or touch anybody. So she's wild. However, after 25, at 26 Leo, after she finishes her opposition to Saturn, she's void of course, because then she's finished and she has nothing else to do until she leaves the sign. So generally, when something is void of course, it is at the end of its journey and has finished with all of its associations and is basically idling until it's idling until it changes signs. Was that cool? And if she were completed to the bad ones, okay, right. So see, same thing. So once again, if she were complected to Venus and Jupiter, she's going to be sweet, she's going to be fun, she's going to be moral with Jupiter, right? Because he's virtue. And then if she's with Mars, she's going to be, once again, remember what I was just saying. So in the case of these natal charts that we were talking about at the very beginning, I'm trying to fulfill my dreams. I'm trying to stay married. I'm trying to keep my wife at home. I'm trying to make sure my children love me when I get older. But I've got this moon Mars and everybody hates my fucking guts. Right? So there we get to see how the moon can indeed fuck it all up. It can fuck everything up, right? I want so bad for my kids to love me. I want so bad for my wife to want to be with me. I want so bad for my wife not to want to divorce me. I want so bad to get a promotion at my job. But every time I open my fucking mouth, I rub someone the wrong way. And remember, the moon is circular, so it's a loop. It's a cycle. Right? It's a constant loop. It's a cycle. That's why when we get into bad mental states, it's cyclical. We start thinking about the same thing over and over. Obsessing is cyclical, is circular. Obsession is circular. We return back to that same thing we were thinking before, and we return back to that same thing, and then we go back to the right. This is how the moon represents our manner and our mind. But if we have nothing to moor it, right, because it's reflective and it has no mooring of its own, right? So if we have nothing to moor it, then the changeability of the moon, and think about people, remember the word loony, a person who's loony, that comes from the term lunar, right? And you go to the loony bin, right? Lunacy. Certain people said that it signifies thinking and inexperience of the mind, and weakness of sense, and the heaviness of the tongue, and respectable women, and the nourishment of little ones, and mothers, and maternal aunts, and wet nurses, and the supplying of foods. So the moon is connected to food because the moon rules Cancer, which is the breast which gives the milk. So it's the breasts that give the milk, and it's the stomach which receives the nourishment. So the moon is connected to nourishment. And even that's a quality of the sensitive soul, is that the sensitive soul not just takes in nourishment, which is part of the vegetative soul, but it also starts to have desire, it starts to have taste, and starts to know what it likes and doesn't like, and things of that nature. It starts to take on a profile of sensory profile. And she signifies the quality of mind according to her commingling with the planets. This is Bundy. So we just left out Kabisi, right? Or did we just leave? I forget who we just left. That doesn't matter. But same thing, right? According to her commingling with the planets, wherefore she is joined with the good planet, Babam, and Valence and Albu said, wherefore she signifies the thinking and novelty of the mind, and the weakness of wits and sense. Right? So this is very similar to what we just read. So weakness of wits and sense is craziness. Heaviness of the tongue, right? That's what we think of as lunacy or mental illness. So the moon is the moon and Mercury. If you remember when we talked about Mercury, we saw that any kind of illnesses with the brain and with the mentation, with the thinking, with the person's brain and mind was a Mercury issue. And so it's looking like it's similar with the moon. So lunar manner, thoughtful people. Once again, this issue of thinking. The moon represents thinking, unstable, and instability, unmoored, vagabond, timid, right? Because the vagabond wanders all over the place, has no set foundation. So this idea of the moon in connection with the fourth house doesn't really make sense, does it? Right? Because the fourth house is home, but the moon really is a vagabond, unstable, changeable, vagabond. Interesting, huh? So more reasoning that the fourth house and the moon in Cancer doesn't really make sense, even though he just said, Valence just said, or Bundy or somebody just said, that if the moon is in the fourth house or what did they say, if they had dignity in the fourth house, that they would be good at working the land and irrigation and things of that nature, which deal with watering, which deal with water and earth, right? But not necessarily do the moon's significations, and thus the moon is ruler of Cancer, do Cancer's significations add up to the fourth house, or or even come together with the fourth house. Timid, pusillanimous, worthless or whispering persons, sponsoring. See, there's this worthless or whispering persons, which we saw with Saturn last week or 2 weeks ago. Sponsors of new things, prodigal persons. Once again, this novelty, this issue of novelty. The temporal. Okay, it makes perfect sense. So remember how we talked about with Saturn 2 weeks ago, that Saturn is time? The moon represents that which is temporal, that which is of today, right? That which the common man. So the music of the common man is popular music, right? And what happens? It's in fashion. Fashion is the moon. Pop music is the moon, right? Because it's in fashion 1 minute, and then 1 minute everybody's forgotten it. Right, so this issue of novelty and the temporal and fashions, fads and fashions, that's all the moon. And I never really put that together before. But that's all coming and going, waxing and waning. Oh, and I said, you know what? I said that the fertility, the maximum fertility of the moon is her waning. I meant waxing phase. Sorry, waxing, which is, of course, her increasing phase. How interesting. That really, how so, Shanice? That really emphasizes the need to see the applying aspect of the moon. How so? The temporal. Oh, very good. Yes, indeed. Well, of course, in Horary, and see, of course, I wasn't even thinking about that, because, of course, I'm a Horary astrologer, and of course, you look right at the moment. The whole thing about Horary, yes, that it's temporary, but that it's temporal. It's in the moment. right? Horary comes from the word hora, which means hour. It's of the hour. We make a chart on at the exact moment that we. So there's that temporal aspect too. It's of the moment. It's momentary, right? But it's significant to this moment, not necessarily a moment 50 years from now. And so that's the difference between a that's the difference between some kind of one-hit wonder and Mozart, or Aretha Franklin, or Ella Fitzgerald, or you know what I'm saying? So maybe we can put more weight on separating Saturn aspects because of his lasting and persistent nature. That's an interesting idea. I love that. But only, once again, remember the term that's used for separating aspects is disregard. The planets are in disregard. So it's not so much, I mean, I love that way of thinking, because basically you're doing the opposite. The fastest planet we should look at the applying. The slowest planets, maybe we should be looking at the separating, right? But it doesn't necessarily make sense, because because the moon rules the game. The moon is the dice herself. The moon rules the game of astrology, and so they're her rules, and her rules are all about what's happening now, what did happen versus what did happen, right? The whole thing is that in a horary chart or an electional chart, even in a natal chart, what's separating is what has already happened, especially in a horary chart. What's already gone? What's already behind me? That's already happened. So, for instance, if someone asks, "Am I pregnant?" and the moon's applying, or the moon is applying or separating, it could be a yes to the ruler of the fifth. It could be a yes, because there she is trining the ruler of the fifth and she's leaving it. Well, it looks like you already just got pregnant. Or there she is applying to the ruler of the fifth. Oh, there it is. You are going to. But what about, did I get the job? It's not the same. If it's a separation, maybe not. If it's an application, more than likely. Right? If it's a separation, it could be the interview. Okay, you just came from talking to them. If it's an application, then hey, that's coming, that's ahead. So I think even with Saturn, I mean, I love it. I would say, even though I'm somewhat naysaying what you're saying, you should look at it anyway. Because I think that's a fascinating concept, and if you have enough charts that show it up, I would love for you to do a little presentation on it. It would be fantastic. But certainly, if we think about in a certain way, I think you're absolutely correct, but it's not in I think an astrologically measurable way, because anybody who is now, I don't know how about the Saturn return thing. Of course, I definitely, we all have our Saturn return stories or whatever. And then there's also this thing called the Sadasati, which is the 7-year period in Jyotish, the 7-year Saturn period in Jyotish. And then, of course, there's the Saturn Dasha Bhukti, that everybody gets the Saturn Bhukti, everybody gets the Saturn Antardasha. But we certainly know that we have residue from what happened to us during important Saturn things, right? We're not the same. I remember one of the things remembering after the Saturn return was, it wasn't so much that I understood who I was, I understood more who I wasn't and what I was not going to do. Right before the Saturn return, it seemed that there were so many possibilities that there were so many possible things that I could possibly do. And then after the Saturn return, it was clear that there weren't. That there were many things I could do, but that it wasn't an endless possibility. That there were definitely things. There were things that I wasn't. And so that certainly is something that you bring with, like a train, right? Like a dress, like a train that you drag behind you in the Saturnian way. So I think it's a fascinating concept what you just brought up. So do look at it. We get sponsors of new things: prodigal persons, messengers. Look, messengers, Mercury, sailors. That's on the high seas. Queens makes sense. Noble women commanding the common people. Millers. But millers, that's interesting. Fishermen, the millers who use water. Fishermen and all those who work on water. Of course, that's talking profession though too. So a lot of times these things get kind of mixed up, and even though I try to separate them out, they kind of move in. So this is a little bit more. So now we've, Lily and Schirner and Lily are our two most recent people. They're our most recent astrologers that we work with. Saunders as well when we get to the medical astrology part. But so Lily is from the 17th century. She signifies one of composed manners, soft, tender creature. So once again, this kind of softness of manner, this timidity, a lover of all honest. Think about the difference between the sun, who can be arrogant, right? The sun can be arrogant. The moon is not like the sun. A lover of all honest and ingenious sciences, a searcher, isn't that interesting? Searcher of and delighter in novelties. Once again, this issue with novelty in the temporal, naturally propense to flit and shift his habitation. So once again, once again, like maybe then we can even be seeing, if we look at the moon in the fourth. Now, I've always said that when I see the moon or Venus in the fourth, here's a determining factor, that usually the person has been raised by a female relative, by the mother, or they come from a maternal, what do they call it, a matriarchal kind of background. But I also wonder, I haven't ever looked at it for this, but I also wonder if it might also represent a shifting or a changeability in habitation because of that. Okay, that's you. Okay, do you have Venus or the moon there, Shanice? Whole sign moon, Placidus, Venus. Whole sign moon, Placidus, Venus. So either way, okay, so that's interesting. Whole sign moon. So which do you see more in your home life? Do you see more of beautifying the home life, and interpersonal issues in the home life, lovely women, or do you see more of the changeability of the moon in the home life? Moon in Aqua, Venus in Pisces. So one would be arid. So the moon in Aries, Aquarius would be kind of arid. So you should be able to tell which one. I mean, it should be both, to be honest. You should be seeing it, but definitely we've got Moon and Venus is both connecting, and the temperament, exactly, right? And so the mother could even be much more rational than emotional, because of the Aquarius is not particularly emotional, not particularly demonstrative, shall we say. Let's see. Okay, so naturally propense to fit, shift his habitation, and steadfast, wholly caring for the present times. Timorous, prodigal, right? Timorous, prodigal, easily frightened. So the moon, interesting. However, loving peace and to live free from the cares of this life. Mere vagabond, idle person, hating labor, drunkard, a sot. So isn't it interesting? Saturn represents labor, and the moon in her negative represents idleness. Isn't that interesting? Because the whole kind of Saturn moon thing. Now, I thought this was fascinating, partially because this is the first time that I've really seen this in Western astrology. So it's common knowledge in Jyotish that the sun is the natural significator for the soul, for the Atma. However, in Western astrology, there's not so much of that. Even in the earlier, time, instead what they would do is they would do the profile of the soul. They would do the three elements of the soul, which I've been teaching, right? The three powers of the soul, the sensitive, the vegetative, sensitive, and intellective, and using the moon. Using the moon and Mercury and the ascendant and that kind of stuff. But in this case, they're using the sun as the natural significator for the soul, and the moon for thoughts, which I love. This is also Bonatti, but he's quoting Artephius and Alcalander. And so he's basically saying if the sun is in a good place from the ascendant, so a good place from the ascendant would be an angle or succeeding house that isn't the eighth house, right? And it would signify that the soul was naturally benevolent. Isn't that interesting? And if he were badly disposed and in a malign place from the ascendant, so like I think especially 612, it signifies that his soul will be naturally malevolent. Now, I don't love this necessarily, this idea that the soul is benevolent, the soul is malevolent, and especially by placement, by what we call accidental dignity, by placement by house, right? But by accident, he could constrain and amend as bad. But what I think I would like to imply instead is that we know that planets in the angles or in succeeding houses are in a state of what we call advancement, right? And another term for advancement is progression, to advance or to progress. Now, one of the things that we want for the soul is we want the soul to progress. Now, these people aren't thinking in a reincarnation way. Now, I most definitely am thinking of the soul as progressing, ascending or progressing and thus ascending and hopefully attaining moksha, which is the release from the cycle of birth, rebirth, and death, right? However, I think that this is kind of what this is talking about. The soul is able to progress. In Venati's time, it would be to progress to be more pious, to be more true in one's worship of God, right? Because religion was the center of the culture. This is the 13th century. And if you were badly disposed, right, if it's in the Cadent houses, if it's in 6, 8, or 12, then it doesn't have the, what's the word that we have for those houses? Retreat. So planets that are in angles or in succeeding houses advance. Planets that are in Cadent houses retreat, which means what? Go back, go backwards, right? Retreat, retreat, that means turn back and run, flee back. So what does that imply then? Not necessarily that the soul itself is malevolent or benevolent, but it could imply that the soul's ability to progress is inhibited by its placement in Cadent houses. So something, of course, not the 9th house, right? Because the 9th house is the sun's joy. But I'm thinking especially 6 and 12 and also 8, right? So there would be places. So something to think about. Look at it in your own chart and think about progression, soul progression. Also, once again, be looking at the local determination, right? If, for instance, a sun that's in, like, for instance, my son's in the 1st house, whole sign. I mean, Alcabitius, but whole sign it's in the 2nd. So it's advancing either way. But let's say that sun were conjunct Mars and opposing the sun, opposing Saturn, and with Rahu and with the North Node. That sun wouldn't really be in great condition. And even though that sun would have the opportunity to progress, that sun may not have the inclination to progress, or vice versa. It might have the inclination to progress because it's in the 1st house, but it might not have the ability to. So something to think about. And then, of course, once again, we come to this idea if if the moon is well disposed, as was said concerning the sun, right? So I would assume that means in good aspects to it. The native's thoughts will be on the good and for the good. And if she were badly disposed, his thoughts will be evil or on evil for evil. And it could also mean angles to the sun, angles and trines to the sun. If the moon were in angles to the sun and trines to the sun, right? If the moon is in the 6th house away from the sun or the 8th away from the sun, that could be more difficult. So I would look at it 2 different ways, what they're saying, because he doesn't get into any details. He just kind of says this. I would look at this in 2 different ways, just as an experiment. I would look at, obviously, any aspects that the sun is making to the moon. I would look at the sign that the moon is. Is the sign in the moon, is the sign that the moon is in a sign where the sun is dignified, like Aries or Leo? Is it in a sign where the sun is detrimented, like Libra or whatever, or Aquarius, right? Then I would also look at, is she in a hot and dry sign, which is like the sun? Then also I would look at what house is she? Is she in an angle? Is she in a trine from the sun? Is she in 1, 7, 10, 1, 7, 10, 4, or is she in 5 or 9 from the sun? And then I would look at, is she in 6, 8, or 12 from the sun, or 3, 3, 6, 8, or 12 from the sun, right? And see if that shows it, because we do know people who dwell on bad thoughts and who can't control their thinking. And once again, the local determination of the moon is going to show that as well. So I thought that was really interesting. Okay, going on to the lunar body, the corporature, they would call it. And basically the moon rules, it's so interesting because white is what the moon is supposed to rule, but in here it says that the moon rules yellow or yellowish gold or whatever. So I know the moon to represent white with a touch of redness. And so one of the things that I tend to think of when I think of moon is, anybody ever known anybody who's got that porcelain white skin, that really soft porcelain white skin that freckles really easily? I think of that. That's white with a touch of redness. I think of that as moon. Right? Usually those people are gingers, right? They usually have red hair and they've got really, really white skin, and they've got red pubes usually too. And they've got almost always on the shoulders, they've got the freckles, and they may have freckles on, their face or whatever. But that's what I think of when I think of moon. Eyebrows benevolent, having eyes totally not totally black, a round face. So that's another thing, the round face, right? Because the moon is circular. Benatti, mashallah, says that she signifies of the figures of men, a white man, snowy, commingled with redness, benevolent eyebrows, having eyes not wholly large, a round face and beautiful stature. So round face, did she say the whiteness? White commingled with red, benevolent eyebrows, and Satyajos. So what I would add to this, because this whole thing with coloration is kind of moot, because there are all kinds of people that are all kinds of colors. But what I would say is that, and this doesn't come up here, but this is something that I've seen. Since the moon is watery, the moon tends to represent kind of watery body types, or body types that hold water a lot, that swell easily, so there tends to be problems with weight, because remember, the moon is changeability. So the weight can go up and down if the moon represents the body. That changeability can happen. The moon goes from empty to full. So you could see the person being quite big one day, and then 2 years later you see them and they're totally skinny. They completely change. So so that's a major aspect of it. But there's a fleshiness and a roundness to them. And so I tend to find that's kind of like typical, if we're talking about all kinds of people, that's kind of, in my opinion, the signature. Gives a man to be of no service, because by day and night he desires to run around here and there. So there again comes this idea of idleness with the moon, because the moon doesn't want to stay in one place. Right? So the moon represents instability. And there, nor does he remain stable anywhere easily, which is true. If she were slow in course in the nativity without perfect reception, and she were joined to a planet quick in course. And he said the lunar man has a round face and average stature, but there is a great alteration of the eye, right? Because of the moon represents the eyes, or one of the eyes, and he was pierced through the eye. And he said that he is a squinting man, or the orb of the eyes is entirely higher. And that I might explain clearly and briefly to you, the other one of the eyes will be by no means lack a defect. So vision issues. Lily. Same thing, fair, white with the red, the face round, gray eyes, a little lowering, much hair both on the head, face, and other parts. Okay, so now he's saying they're hairy. Usually one eye a little larger than the other. That's interesting. Short hands and fleshy, so there's the fleshiness, the whole body inclining to be fleshy, plump, corpulent, and phlegmatic. That's what I tend to see with the lunar body. If she be impedited of the sun in nativity or question, blemish in or near the eye. Okay. If she impedited in succeeded houses, in the site if she be in fortunate and angles and with fixed stars called nebulae. Okay, so that's interesting. If she be in succeeding houses, some blemish in or near the eye. Okay. All right. Professions. Legations, we were talking about that, and commands in the works of waters and lands. Okay, right, waters and lands, that's a major lunar thing, according to the greatness of fortune or evil. She even signifies a position of first place if she were in charge over some matters pertaining to kings, and she were made fortunate in a good aspect to the sun. And of assets, she signifies silver, right? She rules silver, the cultivation of the earth, and if she had authority in the fourth. So there that is, cultivation of the earth if she had authority in the fourth. Tell me something, Shanice, are you good with gardening? Or do you have a garden, or is that something you wanted, or farm?
Actually, this year I just started working on my green thumb, and I have like a forest on my dining table.
All right. Okay, so there's that lunar, there's the moon in the fourth aspect. There's the moon in the fourth. Very, very interesting. Fantastic. All right, same thing with Schoner. Thoughtful people, unstable, vagabond, timid, pusillanimous, worthless, or whispering. We saw this already, didn't we? Sailors, queens, noble women, commanding the common people, millers, fishermen, all who work on water. Queens, countesses, ladies, all manner of women, as also the common people, travelers, pilgrims, sailors, fishermen, fishmongers, brewers, tapsters. Tapsters, now we're coming into bartenders. Vintners, so now we also are coming into wineries and winemakers. Letter carriers, now we're coming to what we would think of with Mercury. Coachmen, huntsmen, messengers. Now, coachmen, letter carriers, and coachmen. Now, letter carriers and coachmen in the post. Now, and messengers. Now I think I understand why. Because even though Mercury is the ruler of messengers, Moon goes from place to place. That's why she rules travel. The Moon never stays in one place. She never stays in one condition. Right now it's so we're in Shashti. So right now it's the 6th lunar day. It's the 6th lunar day, which means that we just finished the 120th degree. Yesterday we got into 120 degrees away from the sun. Today we're maybe 160 degrees away from the sun, or 130 degrees away from the sun, or 128 or 130 degrees. Tomorrow will be 145 or 150 degrees. Every day it's different, and every day she's in a different lunar mansion, right? She's in a different nakshatra, which then also affects how she expresses herself, right? So this is, I think, why we've got the post messengers, coachmen. That's why we've got letter carriers and postmen and coachmen and messengers here, is because they go from place to place. Some say the Pope's legate, right? So the Pope's legate usually doesn't stay in Rome. The Pope's legate goes to another country and lives in that country and toes the Pope's line to the royalty there, right? So so Pope's legate is essentially the voice of the Pope in your country. But he's not in his country, he's gone, and the legate goes from place to place. Okay, this year you'll go to England. Oh, next year you'll go to France. So this year it's and that's why we have, now I see it. Now we know why it's legations and diplomats. So diplomats go from place to place. Legates and legations and diplomats go from place to place. And so that's why. Mariners, millers, alewives. So millers and mariners, okay, working on water. Alewives, maltsters, okay, bartenders in bars, drunkards, oyster wives. Now we saw intoxicants and intoxications under Venus, but remember we were just saying that indeed we do see that the moon has some of the seeds of Venus in her too. And so she gets the drunkards and the maltsters, alewives, millers, and vintners and tapsters and brewers, all of that. Now, of course, that's not the same as specifically being a bartender or having a pub, which would be 5th house in Venus, right? A brewer or a tapster would supply the bar, right? Although you could certainly brew on site as well, right? But not necessarily. So that might be the difference between the moon as brewer and tapster and Venus as bars and ale houses and things of that nature. Notice the ale house is not here. The brewer is, but the ale house is not. Maltsters, drunkards, oyster wives, fisher women, char women. Okay, now we get into the common people. Tripe women, and generally such women as carry commodities in the streets. Also, midwives, nurses, hackneymen, watermen, water bearers. So the flower woman, the woman selling stuff on the street, midwives and nurses, of course, and there we have with nurses, hackneymen. And remember when we were looking at nurses, we saw that there needed to be Moon and Jupiter connection with that. When I remember almost all the nurses that we saw, there was a Moon Jupiter connection, which makes perfect sense. And of course, Moon and Jupiter are both rulers of the sign Cancer. The Moon rules the part of the body as follow: left eye, stomach. So we're going to see this change. Left eye is not going to change, but it's going to change because for women, it's going to be the right eye. The stomach, the breasts, the breath, the spleen, the dura mater, the marrow. So all of these things, breath, spleen, dura mater, and marrow, are more than likely going to drop out, but we're going to continue to see left eye, stomach, and breasts. And look at how Alcabisi says brain and the lungs. We're not going to see that too often, too much more. Notice once again, this is where I saw that she has yellow, not necessarily the white, and salty flavor. And then she signifies the left eye of women, the right. So already, this is what, maybe 700 years later than Valens. And so now we've got these difference. So lung and the brain, Bonatti is once again quoting Taz and Albuaz. And then right eye of women, left eye of men, and impediments to the eye. Okay, Schoner, brain, left eye, right eye of woman, stomach, belly, left side, intestines, bladder. Now, usually that's interesting. We don't usually see the intestines and the bladder connected to a bladder. We don't, although we see them connected to signs, not necessarily to planets. But intestines and bladder tends to represent Scorpio, generative organs, and a bladder represents Scorpio, and Venus rules the generative organs usually. Generative organs in a woman. Right, because in Jyotish, Venus rules the semen. Isn't that interesting, right? Because the generative organs are eggs, and so that makes perfect sense. So the Venus rules the semen in Jyotish, so that might be, even though she generally rules the reproductive organs in both. But interesting that specifically the generative organs in a woman. The liver, that's interesting. The taste, obviously, because of the senses are there. Breast and the disease of these, catarrh, palsy, epilepsy. Yes, Moon was always connected with epilepsy. It was called the falling sickness. Colic, menstruation, diarrhea, menstruation, of course, diarrhea, leonteric, whatever that is, dropsy, phlegmatic, abscesses, cross eyes. And you see a lot of stuff with abscesses. Also, I think that cramps and things of that nature are supposed to fall under it too. Okay, Saunders is a really good source for this. Left eye of a man, right of a woman, stomach, belly, left sides, bowels, bladder, taste, appetite, right? Because remember, both the Venus and the Moon are considered appetitive. Stones, the liver of a woman. Isn't that interesting? Brain, marrow of the back. So marrow comes back. Brain, intestines, entrails. Okay, so it looks like the viscera is ruled by the Moon. Even though Virgo rules the viscera, it looks like the Moon rules them itself, and the ferient or brawny part of the head. We come to the infirmities. Paralysis, that comes up quite often, this issue of paralysis or facial paralysis, dislocation of the limbs, or like the limbs not being able to move correctly, and whatever was in the likeness of cold and moisture. Epilepsy, a twisting of the countenance, those infirmities which pertain to paralysis, and especially a particular kind. Now, isn't that interesting? Because paralysis, you think with Saturn, right? I usually think of Saturn in connection to paralysis. But if it's an infirmity of the Moon who is moving all the time, then paralysis would be her infirmity. Even though Saturn represents paralysis as a state, but as an infirmity, paralysis is what happens to the Moon, because that means she cannot complete her course. She cannot continue through, right? And especially the particular kind, and particularly those which arise in the tongue and lips and eyes. Isn't that interesting? And she signifies the agitation of the limbs, which arise from some illnesses, which often happens because of cold and moist illnesses. We could, on some level, see COVID as a lunar disease. What happens, I mean, of course, it started as a respiratory, it's really kind of a blood vessel disease, so blood is ruled by Jupiter, but we can see it as kind of a lunar infirmity, which I think is kind of interesting. Right. All right. Sorry about that. So good. We'll have all of this. We were doing professions, body parts. I think we had gotten to infirmities, and we were about to start here with Saunders. Let's see. So he's quite a bit more extensive. Chronic diseases signifies falling sickness, which is we talked about already. Is epilepsy, apoplexies, palsies, the colic, the bellyache, arthritis, sciatica, leukophlegmatica, phlegmatia, worms, rheums, lunatics, so worms, that's the viscera, rheums, lunatic passions, there's the mind, quotidian fevers, diseases proceeding of opulations, retention of menstrua, all other excrements are as ordure, urine and sweat, so all of these are wet. These are all moistures. These are all wet substances. Diseases in the left side. So remember, side was one of the things. Stones and the also side. Sun has side. So maybe the sun has the right side and the moon has the left. And of course, we know if any of us do yoga, the Ida Pingala, right? Ida is the sun side, which is right. Pingala is the moon side, which is left. But they both rule the opposite sides of the body. And liver in women. Oh, so once again, liver in women, dropsies, fluxes of the belly, cold rheumatic diseases, cold stomach, gout in the wrists and feet, sciatica. Once again, sciatica. How interesting with the nerves. I wonder if that, but usually nerves is usually connected more to something with Mercury. Let's see, surfeits, coughs, convolutions, king's evil, aposteme, smallpox. So it looks like highly contagious things. Also, that's something that I noticed. Citrine water, isn't that interesting? Because of that color of yellow, right? Salt, phlegm, watery, humorous citrine water. For the most part, with swellings and breakings out. Swelling, remember? So water retention, swelling, that's connected. Lunar colors and flavors. So lunar colors, I usually put all I just kind of use this one slide for all of it, so you can just, everybody can always have them all the time. Watery and salty. She's got the salty. All right. And here's some miscellany. Once again, she rules silver, selenite, and all soft stones and crystals. So she rules actually like quartz. And let's see, beasts in water, which makes sense, and frogs and fish and that kind of thing. The otter, snails, weasel, cunny, all seafowl. Also ducks and geese, cuckoo, geese and duck, the night owl. And then she's got the oyster, cockle, all shellfish, the crab, of course, and lobster, tortoise, and eels. So, so those are all bottom feeders, aren't they? So the ocean floor, right? So there's water and earth. And then fields, fountains, baths, havens of the sea, highways and desert places, port towns, rivers, fish ponds, standing pools, boggy places, common shores, little brooks, springs, harbors for ships or docks. And she rules Holland, right? Holland, the Netherlands, right? That's also a Cancer country. New Zealand, well, New Zealand wouldn't be New Zealand. This is also this is probably part of Belgium. This is probably the Flemish part of Belgium, like Flanders. And then Denmark and Nuremberg is Denmark is surrounded by water and is a port town. And then Nuremberg is in Germany. Now, this is where the presentation stops, and I'm going to go to two charts. This part signifies the life, the body, and also its soul, its strength. So remember, I usually at the very end, I talk about the parts that are, the part that is connected, the lot or the Egyptian part, or Egyptian lot or Arabic part that's connected to the planet. And in this particular case, I didn't tell you what it was, but it's an important one. Signifies life, the body, and also its soul, its strength, fortune, substance, and profit. That is wealth and poverty, gold and silver, heaviness or lightness of things bought in the marketplace, praise, the things bought in the marketplace, praise and good reputation, and honors and recognition, good and evil, present and future, hidden and manifest, and it has signification over everything. It's talking about the part of fortune. So the part of fortune is the part of the moon. This part is called the part of the moon or the ascendant of the moon, and it signifies good fortune. So what I thought I would do is I thought we would look at charts through this lens of the planet. What is the, remember the moon is on her own, she is nothing. Right? On her own, not she's nothing, but on her own, she is without mooring. Let's put it that way. On her own, she is without mooring. And which means that she's movable and changeable and unstable. So as a result of being in association with another planet, association with another planet stabilizes the moon's behavior in the direction of the planet with whom she comes into contact. Thus, the question in all of these charts then is, who is the moon working for? What's mooring her? What's stabilizing this person? And so what we would look at, obviously, we would look at two things. We would look at who rules the moon, the planet that rules the sign the moon is in, and then also the local determination of the moon herself, right? Who's supplying the anchor for the moon? Now, this is serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer's chart. I thought I would just use a plethora of different people, and we could just look at that through this, look at them kind of quickly through this lens. So this is a murderer's chart, so we would expect Mars to be important. And sure enough, Mars is in his own sign, and he is cohabiting with the moon, and the moon is in his sign. So we've already got an inclination towards being Martian, and this is Mars's daytime fiery aspect, masculine aspect. So this is the rushing force Mars, the rushing forward Mars, right? So that's kind of, shall we say, coloring, or that's who she's working for, right? Just by virtue of whose sign she's in. But then, who is she with, or who has she just finished with, right? Who is she? Now, really, when we're thinking like who's she with, we're really thinking about who is she applying to, right? But we also want to know, who did she just come from? So in this particular chart, the moon just came from the square to Saturn. So one of the things we know about Saturn is the symbol, is the significator for death. And Saturn is also the significator for solitariness, taciturnity, for not talking very much, for silence. He's for severity, for laboriousness and severity. And if any of you know anything about Jeffrey Dahmer, there was a whole laborious process that he went through once he killed his victims. All of these tasks and different things that he ended up doing as a result of that. But in this particular case, look at how Saturn is the ruler of the 5th house. Saturn is the ruler of the 5th house of this chart. And so Saturn things would be things that this person would appreciate. So we've got kind of a Mars-Saturn connection. And note also, so Shanice was at the talk on reception, on aspects that involved reception. Note also that the moon is giving Saturn his fall, and Saturn is giving the moon her detriment. So when planets are in detriment or fall, they're going to misbehave. They're going to act badly. Now, what planets does the moon? Look, the moon rules the 10th house, the works by which I am known. And Saturn represents the 5th. Now, we also know that Saturn represents, that the 5th house represents romances, or they tend to call it that, or sensual pleasures. And the 7th house represents love and interpersonal relationships. And so Jeffrey Dahmer had this whole thing about loving, the reason that he killed these people was because he didn't want to part with them. He loved them, and he didn't want to leave them, right? So there's this whole connection here. We already see some of how this Moon Saturn square, even though it's separating, and the fact that the Moon is cohabiting with Mars, can create a very, very malefic disposition. A malefic, and especially malefic to others. Look at how it's right on the cusp of the seventh, and it's opposing. It's right on the cusp. 28 minutes away from the cusp. I mean, that's pretty major. You know, so I think very interesting this chart, and looking at what the person would be, you know, what would they be inclined to? They would be inclined towards Saturnian things. Saturn says no. Saturn restricts. Saturn is capture, and you know, Saturn is capture. Saturn is restriction and confinement, right? The Moon's in the seventh, so they might apply that to the person. Mars is the ruler of the seventh, ruling the Moon. So that might be applied to the beloved. All of this stuff would happen to the other. All right, let's go to another serial killer, Ted Bundy. So note, instead of the Moon being in a sign by Mars, right, the Moon is working for Jupiter in this chart. Note that Jupiter is the ruler of the 8th house and the 5th. So, no, Jupiter's rule of the 8th and the 5th. It's nighttime. This is his daytime expression. So this was what they'd call Mul Trikona in Jyotish. So this might be the one that he would really go towards, since he's a diurnal planet. He's going to be, his joy is Sagittarius. So he's going to naturally kind of do it, but he's also working as the 8th house ruler. And note that you've got the Sun, who's the ruler of the ascendant, Mars, and Jupiter, and Moon, all ruled by the ruler of the 8th house, right? And we've got Mercury, Moon and Mars together, right? So once again, we're looking at a chart. If we're looking at a chart of people, who are serial killers, we should be seeing some connection with Mars, with the Moon, in my opinion. Right? Because Mars is the murderer, Mars is the ruffian. He's not the vagabond, but the ruffian. Right? He's the soldier, the sniper, the killer, the robber, the highwayman. And note it's also with Ketu. So Mars, Ketu, and Ketu and Mars are both called Krura in Sanskrit, in Jyotish, which means cruel. Right? So Mars and Ketu are cruel planets. And you've also got Jupiter in a Mars sign. So Mars is cruel and Jupiter's in that cruelty sign. And then I've already talked about Saturn in Leo and how I call that misanthropic, doesn't like people. And note that the Saturn's right on top of the part of fortune, which means that the ruler of the part of fortune is ruled by the ruler of the 8th and in the same sign with Mars. Right? So same thing. Note also, Sagittarius is a major aspect of things. He met a lot of these women he met on the road. So it's and note how the Jupiter is with the Venus here too. But he met quite a few women on the road as well. And note also that the Venus ruler the 3rd, but she's with Mercury. But so continuing, and also what we've got, the Mars separating from the trine from the Saturn, right? We've got so all of that interesting stuff kind of going on with that. Okay, here's a completely different chart. Here's Ella Fitzgerald, who we've looked at many times, but now we can look at it from a different way. So we're looking at it from the concept of the Moon. So she's working for Mercury. Mercury is the ruler of the 2nd house of the voice. Mercury is in the 10th house of career. Mercury is in Taurus, which also represents the voice, the throat, and the voice, and music, and Mercury is with all this other stuff, right? So the moon is at 26 degrees. This is a void of course chart. Okay, so this is a void of course chart. And the last thing that this planet did was sextile the Mars. So there's an interesting thing about Ella Fitzgerald. And Mars is the ruler of the ninth house of long distance travel. And note also how Venus, the ruler of the part of fortune, is also the ruler of the 3rd and the 10th. Ella Fitzgerald spent, she started in the mid-30s, 1935, she started with Chick Webb, and she probably finished before, both of her legs were amputated. So she probably ended up maybe finishing around 1992, 90, maybe 89, 90, probably makes 86, 87. Let's say 86, 87, 88 is the end of Ella Fitzgerald performing with 2 legs. One of the things they said about Ella Fitzgerald was that she could not ever really stay home for very long. When she'd get off the road, and she would be on the road 48 weeks of the year, 50 weeks of the year. She'd get home, and they said after a week, she'd start to get antsy and not be able to kind of handle it. She'd need to get back on the road. And so that could be an aspect of this mooring, of this lack of mooring in this chart. Because a void of course chart is, tends to kind of meander off to its own devices. And it looks like that's what it was for her. Note that the very last thing that the moon is doing here is aspecting the ruler of the 9th of long distance travel. So, and Ella spent most of her time traveling. And I mean, America, all over the world for her entire, certainly after the 40s, but from the 40s and 50s on, Ella Fitzgerald was singing all over the world for her entire life, for her, for most of the year. And, Belgium one day, Greece the next day, that kind of one-nighters in different countries type shit. So there is the 3rd house connection with Venus and all of that, but there is also this kind of unmoored moon, which has just left the planet that represents pilgrimage and wanderlust, right? Because so the Mars is the natural significator for pilgrimage, and it's also the ruler of 9th house, which is the wanderlust. So this planet, this chart has a very strong wanderlust, which the career gave expression to, and which ended up, in my opinion, kind of taking over. This is author Ernest Hemingway. And okay, the moon is working for Saturn, first of all. So Saturn rules what? Saturn rules the 6th house, and Saturn rules the 5th house. Okay, so one of the things that I found really interesting about Ernest Hemingway's life, beside the fact that he was married 4 times, is that Ernest Hemingway was extremely accident prone and was consistently getting into major accidents, like automobile accidents. He had an accident where the old sit toilets, you used to have to pull a cord. You used to have to pull like a chain, and that's what made the water go down. These are water closets. And he mistook another chain for the water closet, and an entire roof of stuff fell on top of his head. I mean, just all kinds of crazy shit, crazy weird illnesses and recklessnesses kind of happened to him. And so it's interesting to me that 1, the part of fortune is in the 6th house. 2, even though the moon is in the 5th and working for Saturn as the 5th, the moon is also working for the ruler of the 6th. The Saturn rules the 5th and the 6th. Note also, he was known for traveling all over the world. He fought in the Spanish, he covered the Spanish Civil War in the 30s. He went to Africa and hunted game. He was a sportsman and an adventurer. So there's this Saturn. So there's Saturn, the adventurer, as ruler of the fifth. So this person, and also we know that Sagittarius can get itself into trouble. It can get injured as a result. There were hip injuries. But yeah, so the Sagittarius Saturn connecting is who this moon is working for. So we've got this kind of expansive, adventurous Saturn that still is kind of in a sensitive state and possibly prone to difficulties and suffering of some sort. And then what is the moon going to do next? The moon's going to oppose Venus. Is that right? Yep. This man was married 4 times and had issues with women. As a matter of fact, I think it wasn't until his 3rd wife that someone said that they'd met a woman that he couldn't control and boss around. This guy was a very, very, a very kind of a patriarchal, paternalistic, chauvinistic, masculine male man. And when we see Moon Venus, almost always there are female issues. There are issues with women in the chart. Moon Venus opposition specifically, any kind, but especially the Moon Venus opposition. Jupiter in water sign, multiple marriages is right. Well, yeah, ruler of the 7th. First felicity ruler, it's daytime, so it's Venus. She's also in the water. Remember, the water signs are fertile, so they provide multiples, right? They provide multiples. Very good. And all right, moving on. Adolf Hitler. Okay, moon's working for Saturn. Saturn is, now remember, Saturn is the tyrant. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, right? So Saturn and Mars, but notice that Mars is moving away from the square of Saturn. So we've got the Saturn-Mars square, the separating Saturn-Mars square, and the chart ruler is about to move into besiegement, right? The chart ruler is retrograde and moving to the Mars, and then is going to start applying to the Saturn. But what we do have is this Saturn. We've got this Saturn that is in the 10th house, this misanthropic Saturn in Leo in the 10th. And so we know that planets in the 10th want to achieve, want to be public. And then we also see here that the next application to the moon is making is to Jupiter, who rules the 2nd and the 5th. Isn't it interesting how the 5th house has been connected to all of these charts? So note that the planet in the 10th is ruling the ruler of the 5th. So what this person enjoys is being in the public eye. Notice it's also Leo, right? Leo is about recognition, right? So remember, one of the things I always say about Leo is even the shyest Leo, you'll see Leos who will say, I don't really consider myself a Leo. I mean, I don't want the spotlight and I barely ever talk and whatever. And all I say is to them is, but if you do something, do you want to be recognized for it? Oh, absolutely. Bam. So recognition. See, certainly the sun is public, but the sun is always recognizable. The sun doesn't hide in corners, right? So it's always at large, it's always visible. So even though it may not manifest itself as I have to be visible, I have to be seen, look at me, pay attention to me, it is always, I did that, recognize what I did. Oh, I made my dinner. So let's say I made a really nice dinner for you and I'm a Leo. If you don't say anything about the food, I'm going to be pissed. Right? It has nothing to do with needing attention. It's about needing recognition for what it is that I've done. So a person with the planets in the 10th, the moon, and the ruler of the 5th, right? What it is that I enjoy, what it is that gets me off, and being in the public eye gets this person off. Being at large, achievement, climbing the ladder and achievement gets this person off. And then control, right? Control gets this person off because Saturn is the separating squares between the ruler of the seventh and Saturn, right? So Saturn, the ruler of the seventh is other people. The moon is other people. The moon is the common people, right? And so we've got this Saturn above there wanting this kind of control, wanting this kind of public control over the common people. So there we have. So it's interesting when we take so many of these other things, like we're not looking specifically at this Moon, Venus, Saturn thing or some of these other things. We're just looking at this. But all of us, and look, K2 is there too. Krura, don't forget Krura. K2 is Krura. He's cruel. Another Nazi, Joseph Mengele. Joseph Mengele, Joseph Mengele, who was the doctor who did all those horrible, disgusting experiments. Look at that. Moon in Libra and Cancer rising. Isn't that interesting? Moon in Libra, Cancer rising. Shanice, what's that about, do you think? Moon in Libra.
Well, right off the bat, I see that they're squaring each other and it's a partile aspect. So that's really strong. Fighting for dominance here.
Aesthetics, huh? Don't you think? Isn't that what comes up?
Yeah.
Because everything has to be beautiful for Libra, right? Libra wants perfection, wants that perfected aesthetic, right? Libra is aesthetic. Libra is aesthetic. And so this person is ruled by their aesthetic. But look at what kind of aesthetic they have. Venus is in where? Venus is where? She's in Aries. Venus's aesthetic is perverted here, maybe. Who rules the, let's see. So Venus is the ruler of what? She is the ruler of the natural 11th, and she's an interceptor in the 11th, and she's the ruler of the 5th. Wow, all of these planets, all of these charts have had ruler of the 5th involved with the moon. Isn't that fascinating? Fascinating. Okay, so ultimately, this guy basically got to do whatever it is he wanted. He got to have his own little playground or his own little test tube, right? He basically, this person, and obviously there are female problems in this chart too, right? With the Moon Venus and with the Venus in detriment, even though she's getting Libra from the Moon. But what would show to us that there's a problem? That there's some kind of weird problem. Well, we've got the Neptune in the ascendant. Oh, there it is. That's what I was looking for. This, okay, so the part of fortune, because I was trying to do it without the outers. That is always, even though I do use them and I talk about them, that is always my challenge, is we spend so much time with the outers in modern astrology. Can we come to similar kind of understandings? Because, you know, other people were going through this 500 years ago, whatever, how many years ago. Can we come to similar circumstances looking only at the older things? It's not to say that the Uranus on the part of fortune isn't important, because of course it is, right? Why? Because this person had highly unorthodox ideas that he was given free rein to express. Right? This person had highly unorthodox ideas. Is there a connection between Mercury and Uranus? Yes, there is. Look at how Mercury is at 20 degrees of Pisces and Uranus is at 28, even though Mercury is going, and even the combustion, because you can often see the combustion of Mercury as a search for wisdom or a search for the secrets, right? So this person really got lucky. This person got lucky, 5th house luck, and the Venus is right at in the 10th, going towards the 11th, and the 11th house is in the 8th. Ooh, really, the 11th and the 8th. Yeah, so this person got really lucky and was able to kind of express all of its aesthetic. It was able to do the things that were in harmony with their own aesthetic. In harmony with their own aesthetic. I think if we were to go back and look at his theories and ideas, there would be a very strong aesthetic of what is harmonious and what is inharmonious. I think he's the one that came up with the concept of useless eaters, right? So what's necessary, what isn't necessary, what promotes beauty in society, or what promotes a healthy, harmonious society, and what detracts from it. So fascinating. This is a monster with the chart ruler in Libra. Okay, and we just saw another monster with Libra rising. So don't get caught up with the signs. Mozart. So Mozart was kind of an imp, and he's probably on the spectrum, but he was, he was very changeable, and he was very weird and changeable. He was kind of difficult to communicate with, but he was a musical genius, and we can see the musical genius thing here with the moon's next application to Jupiter. And so now we have pushing nature, which Shanice so beautifully recognized last time, where the moon is in the sign of Jupiter, and she's also applying to Jupiter by sextile. And Jupiter is the ruler of the second house, so there'd be substance as a result from this. And then also the moon is the ruler of the 11th, right? So the moon's the ruler of the 11th. And if I'm not mistaken, the moon is the ruler of the spirit, of the part of spirit as well. And so that's a very good thing for, as far as inherent inclination. So we can see that more than likely, once again, this idea of aesthetic would be a preoccupation. And the idea of adventuring into new areas would also be. Now, one of the things about, Mozart, Haydn and Mozart, and to some extent Beethoven, but really Haydn and Mozart are the real representatives of the classical period of classical music. We call that music classical music, but within that genre of music is a period called the classical period. And the classical period, and Joseph Haydn and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart are the main representatives of the classical period, and Beethoven is the bridge between what's called the classical period and the romantic period. Of the classical composers, that are, what shall we say, that are contemporary to Mozart, and Beethoven is not one of them. Mozart is the most forward-looking, the most advanced, the most sophisticated, the most suave, the most together. I mean, just everything about Mozart. Mozart is in another class. When we're talking about the other composers of the same time, not in comparison to Beethoven or to Brahms or to Ravel or anything like that, but when we're just talking about the other people, Mozart is head and shoulders above, in a much more sophisticated, expansive, extensive, deeper. He's deeper, he's more expansive, he's more extensive, he's more everything, and Jupiter is more everything. So that Sagittarian, adventurous, forward-looking, going into territories unknown aspect, that's something that Mozart was doing in the classical era. Now, of course, the person with Sun in Sagittarius then takes it all the way to the next state, to the next step, and that's Beethoven, right? So then Beethoven comes and takes it all the way, shakes it all down. But within the form of the classical form of the mid-18th century, Mozart died in 1795, Mozart is the most advanced, most forward-looking voice, or is the most advanced voice. So I think that maybe that's what this moon Jupiter is really showing us, is this talent for looking forward, for going beyond, right? More of and beyond. And is the moon with Rahu? No, moon with Pluto too. This is the election for the Texas shooting in Uvalde. And we're talking about death, right? We're talking about death and suffering and murder. And what do I say? We're talking about that. What should be involved? The moon. I mean, Mars. And look at what the moon is doing. So, two things. Note that the moon is in Jupiter's sign, and Jupiter is ruler of the eighth. So moon is ruling. Now, this is in Uvalde at the time. Now, this is fascinating in and of itself, and there's an even more fascinating when you look at it from a Jyotish perspective. It's even more fascinating. But just kind of seeing this. Now, this was going on all over the world, right? It didn't have to happen in Uvalde, but it is interesting that at the moment that this started, 1132 was when the shooting started. The moon was in the eighth house, being disposited by the ruler of the eighth, applying to Mars. And it's a little far for the contra anticia, but yes. So Chica, what I would, the anticia contra anticia thing that I would look at is, I would no more than 30 minutes. Because remember, every minute is a different anticia, right? So the actual anticia would be 013 Aries? Yeah, 013 Aries, right? So 231 is a little far. I mean, it's proximies, with an approximation, but generally I would maybe even 15 minutes, because like I said, once we leave once Jupiter left 013, then he was at someone else's anticia. He was at the anticia for 2942 or 48. You see what I'm saying, or whatever. So it's a little bit, but yes, there is a contra anticia relationship. It is close enough, and we know that the anticia tends to be like a shadow conjunction, and the contra anticia tends to be like a shadow opposition. So even there, Chica, that's a fantastic observation, because it's almost like if it were closer, that much closer, we'd have a very interesting contra anticia between Mars and Jupiter, which would be acting like an opposition of Mars to the ruler of the eighth house. And note also that the moon rules the common people. And note also that Jupiter is the ruler of the fifth house of children. And anything else? Well, Venus rules the third. Well, remember also that in ancient Western, the ninth house rules all teachers and all students. So it's not this third house for primary school, ninth house for higher education. All teachers and all students is the ninth house. That's what Bonatti says. That's what, and of course he's quoting Alcabisi or somebody else, right? So look at how the ruler of the eighth is in the ninth. Look at how the ruler of the eighth is also the ruler of the fifth. Look at how the moon is in the sign of the ruler of the eighth and the fifth, and the moon is going to Mars, who rules the ninth. Fascinating, huh? This is Leonardo da Vinci. So Leonardo da Vinci is one of the great, and look, makes perfect sense. He's one of the great, not great, just great artists, but great inventors, right? He's one of the great inventors. He's one of the greatest inventors of the time. I mean, we see some of these things that, these sketches that he made of flying machines, and the sketches that he made of anatomy. He's a major person with kind of progressing the field of anatomy and understanding the human body. Just so many different things. And of course, he's the creator of the Mona Lisa and other incredible, beautiful pieces of painting as well. But we're talking about an all-around artisan, brilliant thinker. Note this moon in Pisces with Jupiter the ruler, cohabiting with Jupiter the ruler. And what's she going to do next? Next thing she's going to do is she's going to, it's a wide, it's 10 degrees, but let's see, she's got 7 and Venus has 3.5, so the 10.5, so we're okay. So the next thing she's going to do is she's applying to Venus, right? This is an artist. Even though the Venus is in the 6th, and notice Sag rising. So once again, this kind of far-reaching pioneer, inventor. So we can see once again, we saw with Mozart, we saw with Mengele, right? This kind of Sagittarius, this kind of Sagittarian forward thinkingness, forward moving. We're moving forward. And also this interdisciplinary aspect of Pisces, right? So this person isn't doing just one thing, he's doing many, there's a multitude of things that this person is encompassing, that this person is mastering. I would imagine more than likely he might not have been particularly organized, right? Jupiter and this person, he might have been like kind of like an absent-minded professor type. Excuse me. And he might not talk very much, right? Mute signs. Always deep in thought, always, in his fantasy, right? There's a whole non-reality aspect to Pisces. Where's Neptune? Oh, Neptune right on the cusp of the 10th. Where's Uranus? Where is Uranus? 22. Ah, so really the closest aspect is between Moon and Uranus. That's the closest aspect, and separating with Venus. And part of fortune is Saturn. Saturn in Libra, exalted in the 10th. This artisan. Yeah, makes perfect sense. And the last chart that I have is the chart of Mae West. Now, you guys are young and probably may not have a real understanding of Mae West and her impact on American culture. Mae West is the Madonna of the 30s. Matter of fact, the Madonna of the 20s and 30s. And if you know what I mean by Madonna, then you know that Madonna, what Madonna is kind of known for, more than she's known for being a singer or a dancer or anything else, is she's known for pushing the morals of the culture forward. She's known for kind of pushing the envelope of moral respectability, and as a result, bringing the culture kind of with her. And this is what Mae West did in a far more risky way, or in a way that she risked far more, rather, in the way that she did this, because Mae West went to jail to do it. Mae West is from Brooklyn, New York, and she got into vaudeville. And she was always, one of the things that they mentioned about Mae West was that she came from a family who was not at all racially prejudiced. And she was born in 1892, you can see here. And so the family had good Black friends that came over to the house all the time. And so there was all of this there was quite a bit of interracial intermingling. And so when Mae West starts to go into, and she has this beautiful figure, this beautiful kind of hourglass figure, big breasts, small waist, big hips, which is very much in the rage during this time period. And so when she starts to go into vaudeville in the early teens, she has had all these Black people kind of around her. She basically appropriates the culture of Black culture, and she becomes one of the first shimmy dancers on Broadway. And so kind of a lot of her, almost all, to be honest, of her career is about choosing suggestive acts that create controversy, and the controversy builds and builds. And so it starts with her as the shimmy dancer, and then she gets bigger and bigger, and she makes it to Broadway, where she starts writing her own plays. And the title of one of her plays, she's the first person to use the title sex for a play. In 1925 or 1925, her play Sex became a rage on Broadway, and it ended up being raided by the police. she had a few different plays that happened. She had one play where she depicted homosexuality and all kinds of other kind of, other kind of depraved things of that time period. Pretty much everything that she did came from the common. It wasn't about, the upper echelon of people. It was almost always showing the common people, the Bowery class, the common classes, whores and madams, homosexuals, transgender people, but not necessarily transgender people, but more like drag queens, but also transgender people as well. So she involved all of those people in theater on Broadway in the 20s and went to jail for it. And she went to jail for it. And not only did she go to jail, but it ended up creating this huge fucking celebrity for her. And so she ended up writing more. She ended up coming out of this notoriety with it, going to jail for it, coming out of notoriety. They would close the show. And of course, they closed the show. More people would want to come see the show. And so amazing, right? That's not even the end of it. So then Mae West gets a call from Hollywood. She goes to Hollywood, and in the very first film, she makes this. In the first film, she's got like maybe 10 minutes in the entire film, but just in her very first scene, someone says, "Oh goodness, what first?" And she says, "Goodness, had nothing to do with it." And so this whole kind of dry, kind of witty, suggestive thing that becomes a part of this kind of female liberation thing, and she becomes the most important Hollywood actress of the entire period of the entire Depression era. So Depression era, before what they call the Hays Code and the morality code. And as a matter of fact, the morality code got accelerated to be instilled because of Mae West. So from 1934 until maybe 1959 or 60, that whole period of Hollywood that people know is really that golden age of Hollywood. That's all highly censored Hollywood, and it was all really instigated by the films that were taking place between 1929 and 1933 that were very suggestive, and Mae West was one of the most important people of that time period. So looking at that, notice that the moon is in Cancer. And what did I say? Mae West had big tits, a small waist, and big hips. She had an hourglass figure. She had what they called the Rubenesque figure, very, very zoftish, voluptuous, very voluptuous. And that's a real woman's figure, right? And that's like a lunar, not this kind of twiggy, skinny shit, right? Model bullshit, but that kind of like a Marilyn Monroe type body is a real woman body at that time and is considered beautiful. And so she had that Mars conjunct with C and Moon pushing power to retrograde Moon, right? And so Moon pushing power to Mercury and Virgo, she wrote all of her own stuff. And she made sure that she had complete power over the script when she was in Hollywood too. She wrote all the plays, and then she made sure that she had complete control over the scripts when she was in Hollywood as well, right? So we've got that moon. So indeed, the moon going to Mercury. And once again, Mercury is in a cold, dry sign. What did I say about the quips? Her dry quips. She wasn't like a Phyllis Diller, a crazy, uproarious, kind of crazy kind of comic. She was always with the zingers, always with the dry zingers, where she might not even show it, like not completely deadpan, but always consistent and always like, for instance, oh my God, what were some? Because I used to be a total Mae West freak. There was a bunch of things where, one of the things is she's the one who discovered Cary Grant. Actually, she saw him on the lot and she was like, who the hell is he? I want him in my next picture. And so that's how Cary Grant got into pictures. But she's in that film with Cary Grant and he says, you naughty, naughty girl. And she goes, you'll find out. And I mean, she's just always got some kind of, crazy, always some kind of like quip. And there's that Mercury moon thing. So the Mercury moon is showing the writer. Is showing the writer, the thematic creator, right? But then also this moon Venus. Remember that the third house is called goddess, and if anything, that's what Mae West really did. Mae West because she was bigger than life. Even though she was performing in films in the 30s, she almost always depicted a period like 40 years earlier, the late 90s. She was never like in a romantic comedy like Spencer Tracy or Kathleen Hepburn or even like Billy Crystal and thank you, Maria. Thanks for coming. Or like a Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan type thing. She was always in control. Always men were clamoring for her. It was never, two equals coming at each other. It was always men under her power. There was always this connection. So there's this strong goddess energy. And note that the part of fortune is in the third. This is the whole sign third we can even look at. We've got both goddesses in the third, and we've got the moon in her joy in the third, in her own sign. The part of fortune is there. And so really what this person came to do was channel goddess energy. Would the power push Mercury be returned with fitness? It would not, and more, it might not even be returned, because it's retrograde, right? So we have a return of virtue. Oh, that's right. Is it with fitness? Mercury's in the fifth. Moon is technically in the second, yes. I mean, it has to be, right? Considering what we know about her. Right? If it weren't returned with fitness, and note also this, that if we look at this chart with the part of fortune as the ascendant, then the ruler of the third is in the third. So we could even see it that way, as that kind of this. So yes, we could even see the third house as the first house, since it's the ascendant, since it's the part of fortune, which is the ascendant of the moon, right? So we could even say that yes. So I would say that yes, this is a return with fitness, and specifically because the Mercury, based on this chart, because the Mercury is on the cusp of the fifth, is in the fifth house. And like I said, we can see that the aspect was working from the life. She wrote all of her own stuff. She always had complete control. And also the delivery. Look, Saturn's in Virgo too. So both of these dry planets are there together. So if you have a chance to, I'm No Angel and She Done Him Wrong are the two great Mae West movies that were made before the what do they call it, censorship, before they started censoring films.